Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the screening of Coded Bias. I'm Doug Fabrizio of KUER Radiowest. Shalini Kantayya is joining us. And Shalini, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having the film. It's an honor to be back in Utah.
Are you muted?
No.
No, okay, there we go. Brilliant. I was muted. Okay. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I am hearing you.
Great. Again, thanks very much for doing this. I guess I'm going to get things started, and we will. We're hoping to hear from those of who are with us tonight who may have comments or questions. Let me get the ball rolling a little bit, because I still have questions. I know I've talked to you back during the Sundance Film Festival, but I wanted to ask you, I guess, to start, one of the things that you have talked about, Shalini, is that really all of the work that you do or have done is about how technology, I think you've described it as how disruptive technology impacts inequality. Mm-hmm. And give me a sense of when that occurred to you, when you decided to make that your work, or did it just happen? Like, how did that thinking go?
I think my process as an artist is very intuitive. I usually never start my films with politics, but always with a person that sort of moves my heart. And that's how all of my films have sort of developed. But then I can sort of look back and say, oh, there's this theme that I was exploring in all of my work. And it is this idea of disruptive technology. Does it make the world more fair or less fair, and for whom? And I think that's very much a theme in Coded Bias.
One of the things that you've talked about is that, and I'm wondering, as you started to dig into this issue, then it seems like what you saw was this issue would go this way, and then there was another element to it, and then another strand to it. And as a documentary filmmaker, someone who's trying to find a focus, that must have been complicated or difficult. But one of the things you've mentioned is that it was really important for you to try to take all of that and translate that for people. Would you just talk a little bit about that process of trying to get all of these pieces together and focus them?
Yes, I'm so grateful for the question. I call it in documentary, the dark night of the soul. But in documentary, that can be like 5 years of your life where you're trying to where you're at the bottom of the barrel of all of this incredible research and trying to discern it and show it in a way that makes sense. And I think in some ways it would have been much easier to make a film that was entirely about facial recognition. But I think this idea that these automated systems are increasingly the gatekeeper and who gets hired and who gets healthcare and who gets undue police scrutiny, and trying somehow to show these invisible systems that are opaque to us and how they can be sort of this invisible gatekeeper of opportunity and of predatory information. And so it was such a tricky process. And to tell you the truth, I think even very close to when we submitted to Sundance, we were still restructuring the film and trying to make sense of it. Wow. I think trying to make a cohesive narrative out of all of this information. And it's, some of the smartest people I've ever interviewed. I think there's something like 7 PhDs in the film, and trying to distill that into a small amount of information and connect that to stories that move the heart, that are heart-led stories, that are about human stories. And I think that's what I really tried to do, was show that the story of technology is a story about human beings, that the impacts of technology are about humans. It's about the reshaping of culture. But I think for me, I'm sort of, as an editor, look for character and arc, the story. And I think it wasn't until Joy went to DC that I knew that there was a documentary there.
Really?
Yes, because we thought that it was new, because I knew I had a character arc.
Yeah.
I knew that from that moment where you see her stumble upon face recognition, not recognizing her dark face, to her as a grad student, trying to make an art project work, to testifying before Congress, that's the transformation of a character, and that's what makes a film. And so once I had that, I knew that I had the through line to hang all of the other pieces.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just a bunch of talking heads. If you can't find actual stories connected to it, I guess you could make that as a film. That could be interesting, but this is what makes it a film, right? Is that there's an arc to it, and it's a story. There are stories.
Hopefully, yes, that it's a
Yeah.
human story
Yeah.
that you get to go on. And I think the other thing that makes it cohesive is actually the voiceover of the AI,
Yeah.
the robot, the chat that sort of morphs into the voice of AI today, which is more of a imagined voice. And I think that also gives it a narrative structure to help make it whole.
What was the conversation like as you were trying to decide? You've talked about how the film is about these invisible systems, but this is a visual form. How do you make that? How did you have? I mean, we know how you made it work, but what was the conversation? It must have been like, how are we going to make this invisible system present for people to see, to animate it, or to give it some sort of life? What was that conversation like as you were thinking about it?
I'm so grateful for the question, because most of the time I do interviews and I'm like a failed AI researcher. I think that it was so hard to make the invisible visible, I'd say. I could not talk, forget visible, to make it make sense.
Yeah.
To make it make sense, even in a way I could speak about. Like, I often joke, like, I couldn't speak to people at parties for 2 years because they'd ask me what I was making a film about, and I'd sort of scratch my head and say, well, it's sort of about racist robots and and how machines can, and I would slowly watch their eyes glaze over. And even to myself, it was so hard to articulate. And I think that's really part of it. And when I listen to some of the people, the school teacher who was wrongly accused of being a bad teacher because of an algorithm, the resident who didn't want facial recognition installed just to get in her home, in her apartment building. And what I learned from them is that part of the issue is that fear we have about talking about things that we don't have scientific knowledge of. Yeah. We're scared to talk about science. And I think I also had that as a filmmaker who didn't understand the subject matter 2 years ago. I was so worried about improper usage of algorithm versus AI versus machine learning, and that someone from Stanford would laugh at me. And, there was so much of this fear of representing scientific thought in a way that had integrity as someone from outside the science community. I think that process was, and I still go through it. Even I'm very humbled. I actually just presented the film at Stanford AI, and was so humbled to be having these conversations with AI researchers. And the film holds up to them, which is incredible. So I think distilling the scientific, just even getting the bites down to something that, okay, if I explained what an algorithm is, how much is too much? How do you sort of pull that back? Okay, great. How do you balance that? Okay, I've just given them a little bit of medicine with a exposition. How do I balance that then with a human story where they get to relax a little bit and hang out with Silky in London, on the street, or Joy in a lab? And so to me, it was that balance of trying to make all of this palatable. I was so worried that it would not be palatable to people. And I'm glad that it is. People are like, I followed that. I understood it. I got it. I feel like I can now sit at the table, because what we're learning with COVID-19 and with my other film that was about solutions to climate change, and this film, is just how important science communication is, and that it's actually a separate skill than doing the science, that we actually need people to translate. That's like a whole job to translate science so that the public can feel empowered to govern and to make public policy. And I hope that coded bias is a small step towards that in the field of AI.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you made it personal, I was thinking about Kathy O'Neill, for example, just telling some of her own personal story that led her to some of these conclusions, some of the epiphanies that she had, but knowing her backstory, knowing how personal this was made a difference to the way she was talking about it. So that personal element, I think you really accomplished. That really came through as well and made it discernible, made me react to it, because I don't understand AI either in a deep way necessarily. So I think the personal part really worked as well.
Thank you for that. And Kathy's extraordinary that way. And I thought the story that she told, I was like, are you 100 years old? When she talks about in math class saying you're not going to need math because you're a girl. And I was like, that happened to you? You're not 100. How did that happen to you?
Yeah, exactly.
So like, just learning from these incredible women who were such trailblazers and pioneers in mathematics, like Kathy O'Neill is often the only, Harvard mathematician, PhD, and to have someone like her be a storyteller who has this other perspective, I think really helps us get there. And I think that part of the reason, if it is successful at translating, is it's the cast of the film. The cast of the film really do an incredible job to translate this information to the public.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's take some questions from some of the viewers tonight. You were mentioning just a moment ago, Shalini, the teacher rating algorithm, and a question comes from Yolanda Marie about. I'm not sure exactly what the question is. She's saying, do you have an update on the teacher rating algorithm? Is it still in use? And I'm not sure if she's saying, is it still in use or it still is in use? And maybe
it is still in use. It's called the value added model. Yeah. And I haven't looked at it since I finished cutting the picture. But at the time that I was finishing in January, there was definitely the value added model was still being used in Florida. And you can look up the value added model is still being used as a metric to govern to grade teachers in certain states, unfortunately. So what I hope is that the film will help empower teachers unions and people who are subject to these systems without understanding them, and I hope that understanding will help people question, empower people to question.
Yeah, because I think that's another theme in the film is people are not conscious of how this stuff is being employed in their lives.
Exactly.
Anne wants to know, how did you get the film footage in China without violating those restrictive laws? How did you get that? Because that young woman was, and she raises that huge ethical question that we're all so baffled by. She's like, no, I know I'm being watched every hour of every day because of this technology, but it's convenient and I don't mind it and it makes me feel stable or secure or whatever. But how did you get that in the first place then?
Well, I work with a local production company in China to help me. And first of all, China does not have a free and independent media. And so what I was dealing with, and I actually tried to talk to tech companies here and there, no one would talk to me. I'm so friendly, but no one would talk to me. And so basically that's who we could find, is someone who would speak in favor of the system on camera. It was probably less of a risk to her. But I don't know. I really feel that that's how she felt. I don't think that it was, who knows what the context or how to exactly receive it. But I think it speaks to something within ourselves. Because I feel like we all respond to that moment like, oh my goodness. But at the same time, they're like, oh, so-and-so has 50,000 likes. they are somebody. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to know them. I just can look at them and be like, oh my God, 1 million Twitter followers. They have prestige. And so we've become that, not by looking at their bio or their, any of those things, but just on the basis of this newfound popularity. And so I think that we all have those tendencies of like, oh my God, this is so easy. And I think what I hope to do is hold that up as a mirror and say, look, what we may be, what of our humanity are we losing in this rush to efficiency?
Yeah.
Is efficiency actually the goal? Because I think sometimes when we talk about tech and tech companies, we talk about it as if the goal of technology were to make it as fast as possible. And I just wanted, I hoped with Coded Bias to have actually help us reframe and say, it's not about making the perfect algorithm. It's actually about making a human-centered society, a society in which the inherent value of every human being is valued.
Yeah.
And so it's my hope by showing that sort of parallel in China that it becomes a reflection of the world that we're living in here in
Meredith,
societies.
right. Meredith Broussard, who mentions that computers can't determine what is good,
Mm-hmm.
so they use popular, and that difference between what is good and what is popular, that's right on with what you're talking about, right? So we have to, yeah. A few questions here. A lot of people are wondering about, and clearly you get these kinds of questions all the time, how it is that people fight these algorithmic surveillance systems that have these embedded biases. Here's a particular question: what's the path forward for real effective legislation? What are you telling people about that question?
Well, the exciting part is that, it's so interesting. I had a similar spiel when I was working on a film about solar energy. Local policy really matters. When you ban facial recognition at your college or your university or your local police department, what I found is that the places that were the fastest to ban facial recognition were actually technological hubs: San Francisco, Oakland, Cambridge, Somerville. And so those citywide changes led to the first ever statewide ban on facial recognition passed in Massachusetts by the ACLU. And I think that gives us a model. And now we have a federal regulation for the first time being introduced in June and of 2020. And that happened partly because of the research in my film, sort of brave scientists speaking truth to power, unencumbered by corporate interest, and also engaged citizens in the streets, peaceful protesters holding power to account. And because of that, not only did we have a moratorium on facial recognition nationally, which would cover the use of facial recognition by the FBI and ICE, our immigration officials, but we also had a sea change where the tech companies changed their policies in June. IBM said that they would get out of the facial recognition game and stop selling it and deploying it and researching it. Microsoft said that they would stop selling it to police departments and law enforcement, and Amazon said they would put a 1-year pause on it. And I think this was sea change that we never thought possible, even when my film premiered at Sundance just in January of this year. And I think that happened because of this combination of informed science and engaged citizenry. And I think I'm also seeing a big way to make change through local and state government that would regulate tech companies, a proposition. It didn't ultimately pass. But if we're able to pass something on the state level with data protections, we can create a situation where we can inconvenience the tech companies enough that they don't want to do policy for 49 states and one.
Mm.
So that to me is how we move the dial down the, I can't think of the sports metaphor, down the down the field, towards the goal.
Yes. I wanted to ask you about this idea of the past and the future that comes up in the film, because Kathy O'Neill mentions this, Meredith Broussard mentions this. They explain to us in the film how algorithms are just really a way of taking data from history and making a prediction about the future, and how, as Meredith says, we're not really going to have social progress if we keep relying on data from the past.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the question to me was like, how do you change that? How do we keep it from creating this deterministic model of creating the future? I mean, we can't alter our history, but what if we change the present? Could that in some way change future algorithms?
It's such an interesting question. It's one that I'll continue to ask. I was just at Stanford asking the same question. And I think that, technology companies all tell me that, no, it's just about the data. It's about, we can just clean up the data, and it's about, what happened is garbage in, garbage out. It was the imperfections of the data. But I tend to be a little skeptical of that point of view. I like I said, I don't think it's about making a perfect algorithm. I do think it's about making a more humane society, that it's not about the technology itself. And I think that's what I would go back to with that. I mean, from a technological standpoint, I don't actually know, because I don't have the advanced degrees to be like, can we create this perfect?
Yeah.
I'm sure. What I will tell you is that I'm positive that there's a technology company that's saying, no, it's just about the data. Of course, we can create the perfect algorithm to run everything. And I would tell you to be highly suspicious about that, because what I've seen is that technology is just a reflection of human beings. And I think that's what I discovered in Coded Bias is you sort of pull back the curtains and there's a short guy in there, like the Wizard of Oz. Like, yeah. It's just us in there, yeah, with this technology. And so we can't expect it to be, it's like, it's sort of, I've heard a great analogy about technology and our children's. We think they're going to be gods, but instead they're just like us.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a question from Kate, who Kate asks, how do we become conscious consumers online? How do we protect ourselves on an individual level? She wants to know, how do you avoid this kind of manipulation in these algorithms? And it makes me also wonder, and I'll just sort of tack this onto Kathy's question. It seems like the moment we're in right now with Coded Bias, with the social dilemma, like this kind of awakening in some ways, where people are sort of finally becoming conscious of all of these invisible systems that are at play, and they want to do something about it. Are you sensing that?
Oh, absolutely. And the maker of The Social Dilemma and I are friends, and we're laughing because people don't know that we know each other, and people are always putting our work together as a part of like, oh my God, between these two films, there's a big wake-up call. And it sort of makes me really happy that our films are, and the fact also is that film, which I would call my film in terms of a little independent canoe up against the cruise ship of social dilemma, in terms of, sort of, but in terms of that, I think that there's a new consciousness that is taking place around technology, and that we're still at the very beginning of a conversation, and that people are starting to put together these two films because, and The Great Hack also, because there's it's starting to give us a new lens into this world that's moving so quickly that we haven't been able to reflect on it. I want to say is that people often ask me about personal responsibility, and I can certainly say, make sure you signed out of Facebook. We can track you in your browsers, and Signal is a little bit better than WhatsApp, and Blue Jeans is a little better than Zoom. But the truth is that we need some laws. It is the only way that we can be together tonight is through Zoom. And we
Right.
shouldn't have to choose between, you know, we shouldn't have to check our civil rights in the terms of conditions. We shouldn't have to worry about what's in the fine print. There should be some legislation that says these are the basic standards that we expect from all these technology companies, and that we who are living in a society where we can no longer opt out. You shouldn't have to choose between sending your child to math class and whether they're subject to invasive surveillance in their homes.
Hmm.
So I think some of those things, I think we should also think critically about what we're offering up so willingly to social media. We're giving up as much information. I mean, more information. I mean, this stuff would make the Easterman Stasi look like it had a light touch. So I think but even still, the kind of information that these companies can have about you, we really need to push for federal legislation. And if you look at the Coded Bias website, there's a number of great organizations that are doing great work that we profile. You can go to codedbias.com, the Take Action page, and there's a number of actions by the ACLU. There's a reading list. All the authors in the film are listed on there, and there's some free readings, so you don't actually have to buy the books to get informed. So that's a great resource and place to start to take action.
Just another quick few. Here's one. I love this question. Comes from a professor at the University of Utah. Coco says, I'm curious about Zoom, and I'm suddenly not sure what I'm requiring of my students in terms of class participation on Zoom and the privacy outside of that space. What do you think about that?
Well, that is the thing. We don't know. And who has the time to read 6 pages of the terms of condition?
Yeah.
You're just like, yeah, firstborn child, sure. Or we just click that button and try to get to math class. And so I think that we actually need to legislate, which means that we need people who understand this stuff to be lawmakers. We need to fill those. I'm so grateful that it's a university professor who's asking the question, because we need algorithmic curriculum, justice curriculum. We have no idea how this stuff works. We need more legal classes, law classes that actually deal with this sort of Wild West space. I have a declaration of data rights as human rights on the Coded Bias website. And we had to consult lawyers, advocates in the UK, because we have no data rights law that sets precedents in the US by which I can even suppose any protections. Wow. So I feel that education, that law, there are all these places that we can start to educate and empower the public. And I think also AI research universities are changing. When I talk to research universities, and they're saying, students now are asking for critical race theory as part of not just programming. They're asking for ethics. They're asking for, and we need to start those ethic classes being the foundational training in these systems before these talented people join companies.
The professor says, I am totally adding algorithmic justice to my curricula. So cheers to you, Professor. Thanks for that. Final question, and this, let me incorporate it. Shin, one of the viewers, asks, does improving the technology make this more fair or just or better? And it makes me think about something that Amy Webb says. She says that we're not actually baking in our ideals to these technologies. So I'm wondering, the technology is great. Will making it better make it more fair, or do we need to adjust our ethics?
We need to adjust our ethics. I mean, I think that what I learned is that there is an inclusion crisis in tech. I mean, 14% of AI researchers are women, and I couldn't get statistics on people of color, and that is abysmal. 14% of any industry, having that few women is abysmal and unacceptable and can't happen. And so I think, especially with a technology that is so future leaning and is going to reshape society. And so I think part of the issue, we saw in our own industry how Oscars So White actually made real structural change in our industry. That when people created a campaign around women directors, that also created more opportunities for other voices to be in the room. We have to make the same urgent call for tech, for a radical kind of inclusion in tech to bring more voices to the table, not just those of women and people of color and different socioeconomic backgrounds and cultures, but also ethicists and civil society and lawyers and people who are thinking for whom this system could fail. So I think that for me, part of it is, yes, technology needs to do better. It needs to create more inclusive systems. It needs to create more of a vetting system. But to me, the problem is fundamentally that big technology has too much power. And as long as it is up to them, we have a problem in our democracy. As long as it is up to big tech to say, oh, is my algorithm biased? Oh, is my algorithm causing problems to democracy in Myanmar? Like, oh, like these things should not be only regulated by technology companies, that we actually need some laws in place. And that means, quite like any scientific issue that is complex, that we have to deal with this massive gap in public education around these issues and empower ourselves so that we can legislate and govern and create more humane uses of the technologies of the future. So it's not just about better technologies, it's about building a better society and a more humane one.
Shalini Kantayya, congratulations. Good work. Thank you very much for joining us. It's really a pleasure.
Thanks so much. It's such an honor to be with you.
And thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. And we'll see you again. Thanks very much. Good night.